The massive alien survey ship Star Seeker hung motionless in the dark void between stars, its sensors focused on an ancient vessel that floated lifelessly ahead. Captain Brown of the Stellar Confederation stood on his bridge, his four eyes narrowing as he studied the strange ship through the main viewport. "Preliminary scans complete, sir," reported Officer White, her tentacles dancing over the holographic controls. "It's definitely of human origin. The design matches their early space age period." Brown made a clicking sound of disappointment. The Stellar Confederation had hoped to find something valuable in this unexplored region. Instead, they had found what appeared to be space junk, an old human warship probably abandoned during their first attempts at space travel. "Any signs of life?" Brown asked, more out of procedure than actual interest. "None, sir. The ship appears to be completely powered down." However, White paused, her scales shifting to a lighter shade of blue, a sign of confusion among her species. "The hull is remarkably intact for its age." Brown walked closer to the viewport, studying the ancient vessel. It was smaller than his survey ship, but had a distinct predatory look about it. The hull was dark gray, almost black, with faded markings that might have once been writing. Various protrusions that he assumed were weapons dotted its surface. "Contact the rest of the fleet," Brown ordered. "Tell them we'd found an old human relic. Maybe we can at least salvage some materials from it." Within hours, 3 more Confederation ships arrived. Among them was the flagship Stellar Grace, carrying Admiral Gray, the overall commander of their exploration fleet. The Admiral's hologram appeared on Brown's bridge, his crystalline form glittering. "A human warship, you say?" Gray's voice held a note of amusement. "From their early space age. That must be primitive indeed." "Yes, Admiral," Brown agreed. "We've managed to get a closer scan. The ship's designation appears to be Thunder's Echo. Our database suggests it was lost during humanity's first interstellar war." "Lost and forgotten," Gray mused. "Like most relics of that era. Have your teams found anything of value?" Officer White spoke up. "Sir, we've detected some unusual readings. The hull material, it's not matching any known composition in our database. Probably some crude alloy they cobbled together." Gray dismissed. Humans were always resourceful, if technologically limited. "Still, protocol demands we document this find properly." The Admiral's crystalline form shifted, a sign of mild annoyance. "Contact the Human Relations Office. Have them send an expert to catalog this relic before we break it down for salvage." As the salvage teams prepared to board the vessel, Officer White continued her scans. Something about the old warship bothered her. The hull showed no signs of micrometeor impacts, despite its apparent age. The weapon mounts, while obviously powered down, seemed to track their ships ever so slightly. And deep within the vessel, her most sensitive instruments detected the faintest trace of energy, like a sleeping giant taking the smallest of breaths. "Sir," she called to Captain Brown, "I recommend we approach with caution. Something about this ship." "It's a derelict, Officer White." Brown cut her off. "A remnant of humanity's first stumbling steps into space. Nothing more." The salvage teams moved closer to the Thunder's Echo in their small craft. As they approached, their lights illuminated more of the ancient vessel's hull. Beneath the layer of space dust, they could make out more details: battle scars that seemed to have partially healed, weapon ports that seemed unusually advanced for their era, and strangest of all, a motto etched into the hull in human writing. Officer White zoomed in on the motto with the ship's cameras. The human letters were faded but still legible. "Not all thunder warns of the storm." She felt her scales ripple with unease. In all her years of space exploration, she had learned that humans had a peculiar way of hiding warnings in plain sight. But her superiors had already made their decision. The Thunder's Echo would be documented, stripped, and recycled. Another piece of human history relegated to the archives. As the salvage teams prepared to cut their way inside, none of them noticed the ship's ancient systems quietly logging their presence, or the low-power signal that began pulsing from deep within its hull, calling out to someone, or something, far away. The thunder, it seemed, was about to break its silence. 3 days after discovering the thunder's echo, the alien salvage teams had made little progress. Their cutting tools barely scratched the ancient hull, and none of their scanning equipment could penetrate deeper than the outer layer of the ship. "Impossible," muttered Chief Engineer Rock, tapping his metallic fingers against a damaged cutting tool. "Even our strongest beams can't breach it." The arrival of the human expert was announced with little fanfare. A small transport ship docked with the Star Seeker, bringing James Miller aboard. He was tall for a human, with gray hair and eyes that seemed to notice everything. The simple blue uniform he wore marked him as a civilian historian. Admiral Gray's hologram flickered as he addressed Miller. "We expect this documentation to be quick, Mr. Miller. The salvage operation is already behind schedule." Miller didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked to the viewport, his eyes fixed on the thunder's echo. "You said this ship was found powered down," he asked quietly. "Completely dead," Captain Brown confirmed. "Just another piece of space junk from humanity's early days." Miller pressed his hand against the cold viewport. "The thunder's echo wasn't just any ship," he said, his voice filled with respect. "She was the first of the Storm-class dreadnoughts. 20 were built. 19 were destroyed in battle. This one simply vanished." Officer White noticed Miller's hands trembling slightly. "You seem troubled, Mr. Miller." "Wouldn't you be?" Miller turned to face the alien crew. "You've found a legend. The Thunder's Echo was the most advanced warship humanity had ever built. Her disappearance changed the course of the First Interstellar War." Admiral Gray's crystalline form sparkled with amusement. "Advanced by human standards of that era, perhaps. But surely you realize how far technology has progressed since then." Miller smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Admiral, do you know why they called them Storm-class ships?" Without waiting for an answer, he continued, "Because like a storm, they were forces of nature. Unstoppable, unpredictable, and most importantly, they were built to survive anything." He pulled out an old data tablet and began sharing images. "Look at these records. The Storm-class ships used technology that we still don't fully understand. Their hulls were made of self-repairing metamaterials. Their weapons could adapt to any defense. Some said they were almost alive." "Fascinating stories," Brown said dismissively. "But that's all they are. Stories." Miller's eyes hardened. "Then explain why your cutting tools can't breach the hull. Explain why your scans can't penetrate it. This ship is over 200 years old, yet it looks like it could have been built yesterday." The bridge fell silent. Officer White's scales shifted to a deep blue of concern. "Sir," she addressed Captain Brown, "perhaps we should listen to." An alarm cut through the silence. One of the salvage teams had finally managed to cut a small hole in the hull. But instead of celebrating, their voices came through filled with panic. The hull, it sealing itself. The crew watched in amazement as the damaged section of the Thunder's Echo began to ripple like liquid metal, the hole slowly closing itself. "Impossible," Chief Engineer Rock whispered. Miller walked to the main console, his movements deliberate. "I need to get aboard that ship, not to document it, but to wake it up properly." "Wake it up." Admiral Gray's hologram flickered with surprise. "You just said it was over 200 years old." "The Storm-class ships were built to last forever," Miller explained. "They could repair themselves, adapt, and evolve. They weren't just warships. They were humanity's greatest achievement." As if responding to his words, a faint pulse of light ran along the Thunder's Echo's hull, like a sleeping giant taking its first breath. "You're all so eager to dismiss human technology as primitive," Miller said quietly. "But did you ever stop to wonder why humanity never built ships like this again? It wasn't because we couldn't. It was because we were afraid of what we had created." The aliens watched in silence as another pulse of light traveled across the ancient warship's hull. This time, it was stronger, more deliberate. The thunder's echo was awakening, and with it, secrets that humanity had chosen to forget were about to come to light. The emergency alarms blared across all 4 Confederation ships, their harsh sound cutting through the tense atmosphere. Officer White's scales had turned almost white with fear as she stared at her sensor readings. Multiple hostile signatures detected. She called out. Swarm vessels, at least 30 of them, coming out of faster-than-light travel. The bridge of the Star Seeker erupted into chaos. The swarm was humanity's ancient enemy, a race of insectoid beings that attacked without warning and showed no mercy. They hadn't been seen in this sector for decades. Admiral Gray's hologram flickered frantically. Battle stations. All ships, defensive formation Delta. Protect the salvage teams. Miller watched the alien crew scramble to their positions. His eyes were fixed on the tactical display, watching as the red dots representing swarm ships multiplied rapidly. How many now? He asked quietly. 50. No, 60 vessels, Officer White reported, her voice shaking. They're launching fighter swarms. Hundreds of them. Captain Brown's face had turned a pale shade of green. Our ships are exploration vessels. We only have basic weapons. The first wave of swarm fighters reached them within minutes. The Confederation ship's shields flared as they absorbed the initial barrage, but warnings already blared about shield strength dropping. Shield integrity at 60%. Chief Engineer Rock shouted. Their weapons have evolved since our last encounter. Miller stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. Let me board the thunder's echo. Admiral Gray's hologram turned to face him. This is hardly the time for your historical documentation, human. You don't understand, Miller said firmly. The Storm-class ships were built specifically to fight the swarm. They were the only ships that could match them effectively. Another blast rocked the Star Seeker. Shields at 40%. Rock reported. We've lost contact with the salvage teams. Miller grabbed the nearest console, steadying himself. The thunder's echo isn't dead. It's in hibernation. I can wake it up. It might be our only chance. This is absurd, Brown started to say, but Officer White cut him off. Sir, look at the old ship. All eyes turned to the viewport. The thunder's echo's hull was now pulsing with regular waves of light, like a heartbeat growing stronger. The weapon ports that had seemed dormant were slowly tracking the swarm fighters. It's responding to their presence, Miller explained. The Storm-class ships were partly alive. They could recognize threats, adapt to them. But it needs a crew, even a small one, to fully activate. Another hit sent sparks flying from several consoles. Shields critical, Rock shouted. We can't take much more. Admiral Gray's hologram flickered, then stabilized. For the first time, fear showed in his crystalline features. Do it, Miller. Take whoever you need. We'll try to buy you time. Miller nodded sharply. I need Engineer Rock and Officer White. Their expertise might help interface with the ship's systems. The 3 of them raced to the shuttle bay as the battle raged around them. The Confederation ships were now in a tight defensive circle, their weakening shields barely holding against the swarm's relentless assault. As their shuttle approached the thunder's echo, Miller saw more signs of the ancient warship awakening. Panels were shifting across its hull, revealing weapon systems that had been hidden beneath. The faded hull markings were becoming clearer, as if the ship was restoring itself. There, Miller pointed to what looked like a docking port, the emergency access hatch. As they drew closer, the port opened smoothly, as if welcoming them. The shuttle landed inside a small hangar that immediately sealed and pressurized itself. It's remembering its protocols, Miller said softly. 200 years asleep, but it hasn't forgotten. They stepped out into the ancient ship's corridors, which lit up as they walked. The air was stale but breathable. Everything looked pristine, as if the crew had left only yesterday. A deep rumble ran through the ship, and they felt it shudder beneath their feet. What was that? White asked nervously. Miller smiled grimly. That, Officer White, was the Thunder's echo waking up. And the swarm is about to remember why humanity's primitive technology was so feared. Behind them, more systems were coming online, and a familiar song of battle was beginning to play. The sound of an ancient warrior preparing for one more fight. The bridge of the Thunder's echo was a marvel of engineering that made Engineer Rock stop in his tracks. Unlike modern ships with their holographic displays and floating screens, everything here was solid and physical. Metal panels lined the walls, filled with buttons and switches that seemed to glow with an inner light. "This isn't primitive technology," Rock whispered. "This is different." Miller strode to the captain's chair, his hands running over the ancient controls. The Storm-class ships were built to survive even if all modern technology failed. Everything you see here works without computers, pure mechanical and analog systems. Another blast rocked the ship. Through the armored windows, they could see the Confederation fleet struggling against the endless waves of swarm fighters. "Shields failing on the Star Seeker," Officer White called out, her scales now a pale blue of fear. She had patched into their fleet's communications through her personal device. Miller's fingers flew over the control panel. "Rock, I need you at engineering. Look for a large red lever marked Core Initiation. White, take weapons control on your left." They rushed to their stations as Miller began the awakening sequence. The bridge hummed with increasing power, and lights flickered on throughout the ship. "Core Initiation lever found," Rock reported. "But sir, these readings, this ship's reactor, it's like nothing I've ever seen." "Pull the lever on my mark," Miller ordered. His hands danced across the main console, and ancient screens lit up with status reports. The Thunder's echo doesn't use standard fusion or antimatter. It uses both, together, in ways we still don't understand. The deck plates vibrated beneath their feet as more systems came online. White stared in amazement as weapon systems activated, showing targeting solutions that modern computers would struggle to calculate. "Now, Rock, pull the lever." The engineer heaved the massive red lever down. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a deep thrumming filled the ship, rising in pitch and power until it felt like the very metal around them was singing. "Power readings off the scale," Rock shouted in disbelief. "The reactor output is higher than all 4 Confederation ships combined." Miller's fingers flew across more controls. The Storm-class ships were built to fight entire fleets alone. They needed that power. He hit a final switch, initiating full system startup. The Thunder's echo came alive around them. Panels that had seemed like solid metal rippled and transformed. The hull itself began to move, plates shifting and realigning. Throughout the ship, weapon systems powered up with a sound like distant thunder. "Weapons online," White reported, her scales now showing the blue-green of excitement. "These targeting systems, they're predicting where the swarm ships will be before they move." "Mechanical predictive targeting," Miller explained. "No computer algorithms to hack or confuse. Pure mechanical calculation based on observed enemy behavior patterns." Through the bridge windows, they watched as the Thunder's echo's hull completed its transformation. What had looked like an old, dormant vessel was now clearly a weapon of war. Gun ports had opened along its length, revealing batteries of weapons that made the aliens' jaws drop. "Those are railguns," Rock said in disbelief. "Physical projectile weapons. But they're so primitive." Miller smiled grimly. "Watch." He pressed a button, and one of the railguns fired. The projectile moved so fast, it left a trail of ionized air. It struck a swarm fighter, and to everyone's shock, passed straight through its energy shields, as if they weren't there. "Physical rounds," Miller explained. "No energy signature to deflect. No computer guidance to jam. Just pure kinetic force, delivered with perfect mechanical precision." The ship shuddered as its massive engines came fully online. The power readings on Rock's panel now exceeded anything in his experience. "All systems are at full power," Miller announced. The Thunder's echo is awake. He gripped the control handles firmly. And it remembers its purpose. As if in response, the ancient warship's external speakers activated, broadcasting a sound that made the swarm ships pause in their attack. The deep, resonant roar of a warrior awakened from slumber, ready for battle once more. The thunder had returned, and the storm was about to break. The thunder's echo moved like a predator awakened from hibernation. Its first action shocked everyone on the bridge. The ancient warship accelerated faster than any modern vessel its size, placing itself between the swarm and the wounded Confederation fleet. Impossible, Rock exclaimed from his engineering station. No ship this large should move that quickly. Miller's hands were steady on the controls. The Storm-class ships used gravity manipulation for movement. No traditional engines. No inertia problems. He looked at Officer White. Weapons free. Show them what thunder really means. White's scales rippled with excitement as she activated the weapon systems. The Thunder's Echo's railguns spoke as one, their projectiles streaking across space at velocities that seemed to bend light itself. Each shot found its mark, tearing through swarm fighter shields like they weren't there. Multiple confirmed kills. White reported. Their shields offer zero protection against our weapons. Through the bridge windows, they watched as the swarm forces reacted to this new threat. The fighters regrouped, forming attack patterns that had devastated countless worlds. Energy weapons flared as they opened fire on the Thunder's Echo. But something incredible happened. Where the swarm's weapons struck, the ancient ship's hull simply absorbed the energy, rippling like liquid metal before solidifying again. Self-repairing metamaterials, Miller explained calmly. The more they shoot us, the stronger the hull becomes. It learns from each attack. Admiral Gray's voice crackled over the comm system. By the stars, what are we witnessing? The Thunder's Echo's response was to unleash its secondary weapons. Ports along its flanks opened, revealing what looked like simple metal spheres. They launched into space, then split apart into clouds of smaller objects. Mechanical smart minds, Miller said. No electronics to jam. Just pure mechanical triggers and kinetic payloads. The swarm fighters tried to evade, but the minds seemed to predict their movement patterns. Explosions filled space as dozens of fighters were caught in the metal storm. Rock's console suddenly lit up with warnings. Multiple swarm capital ships approaching. They're charging their main weapons. The first blast from a swarm capital ship struck the Thunder's Echo head-on. The bridge crew braced for impact, but instead of damage, they felt the ship change. The hull hummed with absorbed energy, and new weapon ports appeared along its length. Energy recycling systems, Miller said with a grim smile. Their own weapons make us stronger. The Thunder's Echo's main gun, a massive railgun running the length of the ship, aligned with the nearest swarm capital ship. The weapon's charge built with a sound like an approaching storm. Brace for recoil, Miller ordered. The shot, when it came, was like a thunderclap in space. A projectile the size of a small shuttle, accelerated to near relativistic speeds, struck the swarm vessel. The enemy ship's shields flared brilliantly, and then failed completely as the round tore the vessel in half. Direct hit, White shouted, her scales now a bright orange of battle joy. Enemy capital ship destroyed. The remaining swarm ships began to pull back, clearly reassessing their strategy. They had never encountered weapons that ignored their shields, or a hull that grew stronger from their attacks. They're regrouping for another attack, Rock reported, studying his sensors. But look, they're keeping their distance now. They're afraid. Miller nodded. The swarm operates like insects. They learn quickly what can hurt them. He adjusted their position, keeping the Thunder's Echo between the enemy and the Confederation fleet. But they're also stubborn. They'll be back. As if proving his words, the remaining swarm ships began to move in complex patterns, clearly preparing for another assault. But now they moved cautiously, respecting the ancient human warship as a serious threat. Send a message to Admiral Gray, Miller ordered. Tell him to get his ships ready to move. When the swarm attacks again, he patted the control panel of the Thunder's Echo fondly. We'll show them why humanity's primitive technology was feared across the galaxy. The ship hummed beneath them, its systems fully awakened and battle-ready. In space around them, the swarm prepared for their next attack. But this time they faced something they had never expected. A legend come to life, a warrior from humanity's past, ready to teach them the true meaning of fear. The real battle was about to begin. The swarm's second attack came with a new strategy. Hundreds of smaller ships surrounded the Thunder's Echo, firing from all directions while their capital ships charged massive energy weapons. "They're trying to overwhelm our tracking systems," White reported, her scales shifting to a deep purple of concentration. Miller nodded calmly. "That's what everyone tried against the Storm-class ships. Rock, activate the close defense system." The engineer found the controls, another set of large mechanical levers. As he pulled them, the Thunder's Echo's hull transformed again. Thousands of small ports opened across its surface, each revealing what looked like a tiny metal tube. "What are those?" White asked, fascinated. "Chain guns," Miller replied. "Simple, rotating barrel weapons. No electronics, just mechanical timing and triggers." The space around the Thunder's Echo erupted in a sphere of metal as the chain guns activated. Each gun fired hundreds of rounds per second, creating a wall of projectiles that shredded any swarm fighter that came too close. "Amazing," Rock exclaimed. "The targeting is perfect, but I can't find a single targeting computer." "Because there isn't one," Miller explained while maneuvering the ship. "The guns are aimed by mechanical calculators, gears and springs that predict movement patterns. The swarm can't hack or jam pure mechanics." A massive energy beam from a swarm capital ship struck the Thunder's Echo. Instead of causing damage, the ship's hull absorbed the energy, glowing with power. "Energy storage at maximum," Rock reported excitedly. "The ship, it's ready for something big." Miller's hands moved to a covered panel on his control station. The Storm-class ships had one feature that made them truly feared. He flipped the cover open, revealing a large red button. The storm burst. He pressed the button. The Thunder's Echo shuddered as all its stored energy was channeled through its hull. For a moment, the ship glowed like a newborn star. Then it released the energy. A wave of pure force exploded outward in all directions. Swarm fighters caught in the blast simply ceased to exist. Their capital ship's shields flickered and failed, leaving them vulnerable. "All weapons, fire," Miller commanded. The Thunder's Echo unleashed everything it had. Railguns thundered, chain guns roared, and mechanical smart mines filled space with destruction. Without their shields, the swarm capital ship stood no chance against the ancient human weapons. "Enemy fleet is in chaos," White reported joyfully. "They're breaking formation." Through the bridge windows, they watched as the mighty swarm fleet began to retreat. Ships disappeared into faster-than-light travel, fleeing from the weapon they had dismissed as primitive. Admiral Gray's voice came over the comm system, filled with awe. "That was incredible. But surely the ship needs to recharge after such an attack." Miller laughed. "Admiral, the Thunder's Echo was built to fight entire wars alone. That was just its warm-up." He turned to Rock. "Show them our power readings." The engineer transmitted the data. There was a long silence from the Confederation fleet. "That's impossible," Admiral Gray finally said. "Your power levels are higher than when you started." "The Storm-class ships were built to learn and adapt," Miller explained. "Every attack makes them stronger. Every battle teaches them new tricks." He patted his control panel fondly. The swarm just taught this old warrior some very interesting lessons. The last of the swarm ships vanished into faster-than-light travel, leaving behind only debris as evidence of the battle. The Confederation fleet moved closer to the Thunder's Echo, their initial dismissal of the primitive vessel replaced with deep respect. "I believe," Miller said, looking at his alien crew members, That we've proved human technology isn't quite as primitive as you thought. White's scales had turned gold, a sign of highest respect. We were wrong, Mr. Miller. Very wrong. The real question, Rock added, studying his engineering readings with fascination, is what else can this ship do? Miller smiled as the Thunder's Echo systems continued to hum with power, ready for more action. Would you like to find out? Around them, the ancient warship seemed to pulse with anticipation, like a warrior who had remembered its purpose and was eager to continue its mission. The legend of the Storm-class ships was no longer just a story. It was alive and awake, ready to protect humanity and its allies once again. 3 months after the battle, the Thunder's Echo floated in high orbit above the Confederation's main shipyard. The ancient warship had become something of a celebrity, with ships from across the galaxy coming to see the vessel that had single-handedly driven off a swarm fleet. Miller stood on the observation deck of the shipyard's command station, watching as teams of alien engineers carefully studied the Thunder's Echo. Beside him, Admiral Gray's crystalline form glittered with embarrassment. "I suppose I owe humanity an apology," the Admiral said. "We were arrogant to dismiss your technology as primitive." Miller smiled, watching as Engineer Rock directed a team examining the ship's hull. The engineer had become the lead researcher on the Thunder's Echo project, his initial skepticism replaced by complete fascination. "The funny thing is," Miller replied, "these ships weren't even humanity's most advanced technology. They were just the most reliable." Officer White, now promoted to Commander White, joined them at the window. Her scales showed the deep blue of curiosity. "What do you mean?" "Humanity tried building ships with advanced AI, with pure energy weapons, with all sorts of cutting-edge technology," Miller explained. "But in war, we learned that complexity creates weakness. The Storm-class ships were built on a simple principle: mechanical systems, backed up by human intuition." Below them, the Thunder's Echo's hull rippled slightly, still adapting and learning even after the battle. The ship had refused to power down completely, maintaining a low-level awareness that fascinated the alien scientists. "We've had to completely revise our understanding of technological progress," Rock said, joining them after his inspection. "We thought digital was always better than analog, energy weapons always superior to physical ones." He shook his head in amazement. But the Thunder's Echo proved that sometimes the old ways are best. The observation deck's door slid open, and a group of alien military officers entered. They were representatives from various species, all coming to see the legendary ship. "The Confederation Council has reached a decision," Admiral Gray announced. "We're proposing a joint human-alien crew for the Thunder's Echo. If," he turned to Miller, "you're willing to serve as her permanent captain." Miller's eyes widened in surprise. "Me? But I'm just a historian." White's scales rippled with amusement. "A historian who awakened a legend and saved an entire fleet. Besides, the ship seems to like you." As if in response, the Thunder's Echo's running lights pulsed briefly, sending patterns across its hull that almost looked like waves of approval. "There's more," Rock added excitedly. "The Council has approved my proposal to study the Storm-class ship's technology, not to replace it with modern systems, but to learn from it, to combine the best of old and new." Miller walked closer to the window, placing his hand against the cool glass. "You know, when these ships were first built, some people feared them, said they were too powerful, too independent. That's why the program was eventually shut down." He turned to face the others. "But they were never meant to be weapons of fear. They were guardians, protectors." "And now?" Admiral Gray asked. "Now," Miller smiled, "she can be both a reminder of the past and a guardian for the future. Not just for humanity, but for all species." The Thunder's Echo's hull shifted again, weapon ports briefly appearing before smoothly vanishing back into its surface. The ship seemed to stand prouder in space, as if aware of its new purpose. "The swarm will return," White said quietly. "They always do." "And we'll be ready," Miller replied. "Not just with the Thunder's Echo, But with everything we learned from her, sometimes the best way forward is to remember what worked in the past. As they watched, maintenance crews began painting new markings on the Thunder's Echo's hull, the combined symbols of humanity and the Confederation. The old warrior was getting a new mission, a new purpose, but its core remained the same: a protector of civilization, a guardian against the darkness. "You know what they're calling her now?" Rock asked, his metallic fingers tapping against his datapad. "The thunder that bridges worlds." Miller nodded, watching as the ancient ship's hull rippled one more time, as if accepting its new title. The Thunder's Echo had done more than just prove humanity's worth. It had brought different species together, teaching them all that true strength lies not in dismissing the old or blindly embracing the new, but in finding the wisdom to know when each has value. The legend had become legacy, and the legacy would echo through the stars.